Welcome back. This is my commentary of a game in the 1830 tournament. It's the semifinal game, so winner of this will advance to the final. And there's some strange stuff that happens in this game, so I'm excited to bring it to you and talk it through. Arison's going to be leading us off in the auction, and we'll place a bid on the D and H. Not a Tree follows up on the Camden and Amboy. I join on the M and H, so the three main privates all have bids now. Reveler will contest the M and H against me, leaving a potential opportunity for an early pull. If Arison wants, they could bid on the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and they would almost certainly end up with the Champlain and St. Lawrence and D&H for cheap, because Not a Tree would pull for the Camden and Amboy. I don't think it's an unreasonable strategy. The C&H for face is obviously dangerous, but if you end up with the D&H and the Champlain and St. Lawrence for near face, you're probably not in that much of a worse position, to be honest, and that would put Reveler and myself on the under the gun for the B&O. So I wouldn't hate that move, but he ultimately decides to take the safer line and contest the Camden and Amboy. Not a Tree will go for the Champlain and St. Lawrence, probably hoping to get a cheap Champlain and St. Lawrence and then contest the Camden and Amboy. Needs to be a little bit careful with this position, though, because if they get the Champlain and St. Lawrence, it puts them at a little bit of a disadvantage for winning the Camden and Amboy, and then they may very well find themselves needing to buy the B&O. I will take the Delaware and Hudson. Delaware and Hudson and Mohawk and Hudson are two of my favorite privates. They're probably slightly weaker than the Camden and Amboy, but I think they are a little more flexible. And if you win one of these, you don't quite have the same target painted on your back that you do if you get a cheap C&A. So I tend to favor one of those two privates. Reveler is going to join the party on the Camden and Amboy, and that leaves Arison to pull. If we back it up for a second, I'm not entirely sure why he pulled there. I guess he wasn't excited about contesting the Champlain and St. Lawrence, and fair enough, but he could have just passed. He already has bids on two privates, doesn't really need the $5 of revenue. You know, that said, I don't know if it's that consequential a decision. I don't feel too strongly about it either way. Anyway, he pulls. Not a Tree gets a cheap Champlain and St. Lawrence, and that leaves me and Arison to bid out for the D&H. We both have another private later in the auction to fall back on, so it isn't make or break for either one of us. But that said, I'm pretty incentivized to win early and then just take the stress off the rest of the auction. If I win the D&H here, I don't have to worry about the B&O, and I can just price and force the M&H and be happy. So I'm pretty personally incentivized to win here. I'm not sure what Arison's feelings are on this, of course. So we bid this up, and I end up taking it for 100, which I think is a very reasonable price. This puts me back into the mix for the M&H, but now that I have the D&H, I'm not too concerned about this private. I'll just bid it up a little bit so he doesn't get it for too cheap, and he ends up taking it for 160. I think that's a reasonable price again. I probably wouldn't go much higher than that, and he's probably pretty happy with it as well. So this brings us to the C&A. 3 players on this. Reveler probably is not super motivated to be involved in this auction now that he has the M&H. Not a Tree and Arison, on the other hand, whoever doesn't win this will have to get the B&O, and priority is important here, because if the Arison player ends up with the B&O, that means Not a Tree will also have priority into the stock round with the C&A. So that could be a pretty strong start for them. That said, as we noted before, Not a Tree's at a disadvantage here because they won that Champlain and St. Lawrence, so they have $45 less compared to Arison to buy the C&A for a reasonable price. So we'll see what happens here. Not a Tree bids to 180, and then Reveler just passes on. Very reasonable. And it looks like they will bid this up to a fairly reasonable price already. Ends up going for 250, which does leave Not a Tree. Actually, no, he's going to be short floating the PRR in stock round 1. So he will have priority, could secure that presidency if he wants it, but won't be able to float it right away. So well played from Arison to bid that up adequately. B&O should be going to Arison here. He takes it and pars it at 100. This is something that will become relevant in the later game, but I think it's become almost rote for many players to par the B&O at 100 when they win that private. The bad part about the B&O is the private. It is not the company or the corporation. So once you have the B&O private, I don't think there's anything wrong with running the B&O Corporation. You can't run it if you bid it at 100, of course, but in most cases, if you just have the Baltimore and Ohio private, you can par it at 90 and still run it. And I think that's usually what you want to do, just because it's actually a very good company. And if you start it early, you can get guaranteed access into Lancaster. So he does take the more traditional line of parring at 100 to maximize the value of his private, since you get those 2 shares for free when you get the private. But I think that I would prefer just saying, well, I'm stuck in a rough position, but I'm going to make the best out of it and par it at 90 and just play it. But that's not what we see here. Not a Tree, as noted, has priority. Does decide to par the PRR and reserve that presidency. Won't be able to float it on his own, but could always hope for a break from one of the other players. And regardless, we'll have the liquidity to par it in the next, or float it in the next stock round. This leaves me next, and I have my pick of the litter, so to speak. I think the 2 choices here are basically the C&O and the NY&H. The NYC is always tempting, but at this level of play, starting the NYC before the NY&H is parred is a death sentence. So although I like the NYC as a company, I think it's always the wrong decision to par it early like this, leaving us with the C&O and the NY&H. C&O has the higher revenue, 70 versus 50 on the NY&H. And because I have the D&H private, I have the ability to teleport out of the C&O's corner if I need to. So I take the C&O for a couple of reasons here. One's the higher revenue. 2 is to deny it to the other players. If there's a stall in the game, I can sit on that $70 of revenue and be happy relative to everybody else. So yeah, that's my choice. And I par it low. I always want to par low and operate late because I want to be one of the first players to buy in my privates and get that jump start in liquidity and net worth. So that's my goal. It's almost a disadvantage in stock round 1 to have priority because you have to par before the other players. So even if you par low, you're going to be operating ahead of them. Now that said, it's a bit counterweighted or counterbalanced by the fact that you get your first choice of company. So I can't complain too much, but there is some tension there, and there is a little bit of a balancing act. Reveler's up. He's going to take the NY&H, so the 2 companies we expected are parred and going to float. Arison now has to decide whether or not they want to sit on revenue and just wait to par the B&O or float the B&O in the next couple of operating rounds, or if they're going to invest their cash. They're going to pass for now. Not a Tree passing. Looks like me and Reveler are going to just float our companies. Everybody else is passing. And now they are both floated. Arison now decides to invest his cash. Didn't really have to wait, but I suppose didn't want to give me the opportunity to float at just 50% invested, which is fair enough, but not a huge deal breaker either way. Looks like the C&O gets bought out by Arison. Everybody's on auto pass, and we are into operating round 1.1. Arison did decide not to invest in the NY&H. Interesting decision there from both myself and Arison. If you're Arison, you're going to put yourself at risk with a 40% investment in one company. Why not just deploy the capital and buy at least one more share in the NY&H? Myself, I don't buy an NY&H because I'm not convinced that the game state is going to stall, and these NY&H shares may not actually pay depending on how the other players act before the company gets sold down. So I'd rather just sit on the cash, leave myself flexible, and see how the game develops before committing myself to investing in the NY&H. The fact that only 2 players or 2 companies parred or floated here means that we may be in for a little bit of a slower game, so maybe I should have bought those shares. But again, both the C&O and the NY&H are going to fall back after the PRR floats in the next stock round. So there's a chance that the PRR buys more than 1 2 train, and then the 3 trains come out in SR 2.1. I will note one other tension here is that because Arison fully invested in my company, I've floated up. So even if I fall back here and then the PRR floats, I'm going to float up again in the next stock round, and I'll be operating first in operating order again. So I'm a little bit worried about that because I definitely don't want to be in a position where everyone buys in their privates except for me. Okay, so a little bit of foreshadowing there, but C&O is up first. lays west towards Chicago, buys a single 2 train. NY&H is going to lay the New Haven track, lays it friendly for the NYC, buys a single 2 train, and we are into stock round 2. So no surprises there. Not a tree now. Probably is going to be taking the PRR all the way up to 60%, and starts working towards that. I still have some cash to deploy, and I will buy that NY&H share now. Reveler, not enough cash. Arison will also follow my lead and buy a share there. So we are tied at 7 shares each. And then Not a Tree should be giving me priority as a result of having to float the PRR. I decide to sell a CNO down, and this is the reason that we were talking about to try and change operating order a little bit. This way, if I float up, I'll still be operating behind the PRR. I think in retrospect, I could have done this at a different time. As it stands, there's really no reason for the other players not to buy the share if they want it. They would have to sell a share to do it, but it doesn't cost them anything. If I wait until the PRR has floated and Not a Tree has fully capitalized his company, then it would cost the other players something to buy my CNO share. As it stands, it's basically a free action. As I noted, the CNO has the highest revenue, so trading an NY&H for a CNO is basically a no-brainer. And it has the added benefit of one of these players sells a NY&H, specifically Reveler, that it will put them operating last, which we've discussed is desirable. So I think it was a small mistake from me to sell my share now instead of waiting for the next round in the stock round, because now it's going to get bought, and there's really no downside to Reveler for having done that. Arison's passing, PRR floats, and now I think everyone just passes. So we are into stock round 2.1, first operation of the PRR, and we'll note that because of my little bit of a blunder on the CNO, I will be operating second instead of third, whereas I think I had a real opportunity to operate third if I had played a little smarter. PRR heads east, buys a single 2 train. So because they bought the single 2 train, it doesn't really matter right now, but you always got to think to the future. If you're operating early in this operating round, you got to do something to ensure that you can change that so you're operating later in later operating rounds if your goal is to buy in your privates late. So that's my thinking here. I lay into Chicago and I'm going to run my train, but I'm going to withhold. And I do that because of the operating issue that we've been kind of harping on, but also because I only have 50% of the company and Arison has 40%. So in a situation like that, I'm going to need this money eventually. It's going to be a permanent train down the road. So I might as well just withhold now and hope that I can convince the other players to sell out of my company, put me deeper into the yellow or orange or brown zones of the market, and just deny them any benefit from having invested in my companies. My goal at this stage in the game is just to basically get the CNO as far east as I can before the BNO floats. So if I can deny Arison all the capital that he invested in my CNO, that makes that BNO float later, and then maybe I can get 1, 2, and 3 track lays before this BNO is ever floated. If that happens, I think the BNO's game is over before it's even started, and Arison's going to really regret having parred the BNO high and invested in my CNO. He will probably have wished that he had parred the BNO low and just started running it. Anyway, that's the goal for right now, so I withhold. NY&H is up, is running out of track it can lays the last track it has available to itself, and is going to run for 50. And they similarly withhold. And I think the mental math there is the same as it is for me. They want to make sure that they're operating last in operating order so that when these privates become available, they are guaranteed to be able to buy theirs in the proper stock round. So by my withhold, I've kind of incentivized Reveler to also withhold, which is a little bit of a bummer for me because I own 20% of that company. If we look at the private income here, you will see that I am in last place in terms of the private income. So if the game stalls and everyone's just withholding, traditional teaching would be, well, that I'm losing the game, I'm falling behind. And I really want to push back against that because I think that teaching is really impractical and kind of a naive way of viewing the game. It's absolutely true that if we had this game stall for hundreds of operating rounds, the bank would actually eventually break, and I would lose because my private income is lower than everyone else's. But that said, just because that extreme case is technically true doesn't mean that there's no valid scenario for the game to stall for a couple of operating rounds, while I fall gradually behind on private income. A difference of $20 of income a couple of times, in my opinion, is not going to break my position in this game so badly that I can't afford to withhold and stall things out. And the reason I'm saying this is, again, because even though I'm stalling and falling behind on income, I'm developing map presence that other players are not able to equal. The B&O, if they want to sit on their private income and lay no track for 4 stock rounds or whatever, that's fine. They're going to be a terrible company for the rest of the game as a result of that decision. And the $100 of private income they net against me is not going to be the difference maker at the end of the game. The NY&H similarly has no more track that it can develop. So if it wants to just sit in its corner and run for 50, that's fine. I'm fine to trade that income for a little more track development for the C&O. So that's my rationale here. Anyway, we're into stock round 3. A little bit of a slow start. I don't have cash to buy shares. Oh, sorry, I do. So I'm looking at that NY&H share, and I just hoover that up. And that's really nice for me to be able to take care of priority because take advantage of that priority. Because if I had not operated early in this stock round, I would not have been buying a share. So I'm just looking at the share counts here. I'm in the lead. Arison should be able to equal my share count if they want, but looking at Not a Tree and Reveler, they're already starting to fall behind in share count. And you'll find that if this game stalls, you're going to run out of valid shares to buy. Reveler's going to pass, Arison's passing, Not a Tree passing. So I cost myself priority, but I picked up a potentially paying share, and shares are king in 1830 in particular, and to some extent 18X in general. So I'm happy to just gradually build a share lead here. C&O is operating first, and this is because my company is the only company that's been bought out, so I keep floating up even though I'm withholding and falling back. I can't seem to get myself into a position I want to be, which is late in operating order. I am happy though that we're a little bit of a stall, and I just lay Akron, and I'm just starting to head east to those higher revenue centers. I withhold again for the same reasons that we've discussed. PRR is up, they get into Lancaster, they token it, and they are going to withhold. This is the asymmetry that I was talking about earlier. By starting the C&O versus one of these other companies, I just have a lot higher revenue to benefit from in a stall. So withholding 30 is kind of underwhelming. Withholding for 70, well, that's something to actually get excited about. $70 a couple times, that's easily a 4-train or one of these trains or a token. It's going to take a lot more withholds at 30 for it to be worthwhile. Doesn't buy a train. Everybody's playing a game of chicken with this 4th 2-train, which is pretty typical. NY&H has no valid track and will actually pay it out. Now that I'm at 30% of this company and he's at 50%, I would expect him to continue withholding, but I think he's getting a little bit of cold feet and worried about this game stalling. So he says, well, if nobody's going to pay out, I might as well just start reaping the rewards of my company and pay out. But as a minority investor, this is benefiting me nearly as much as it is him. So I'm happy to see it. Stock round 4, I have basically no cash. That's because I'm already sitting on shares. But these other players with extra cash here, their options to buy shares are pretty limited. The PRR is just running for 30, as we've noted, and has already expressed a preference for withholding. So maybe it's not the most appealing purchase, and that leaves one player with an NY&H share. The rest of these players, may struggle to buy shares. Reveler's going to pass. He's valuing having priority. We'll see if that's allowed to continue. Arison passes. Not a Tree is going to mess up their plans and will buy the NY&H share that I was referencing, which will actually lead me to have priority deals. So I'm real happy about that, obviously. I pass, and it looks like everyone else will pass, and we're into operating round 4. So this has turned into a pretty long stall. Nobody is willing to buy that last 2-train and open up the private companies, which I don't know if it's benefiting me or not. It's probably a little bit neutral, but it's definitely hurting this B&O company who is not developing any track. NY&H runs for 50 and pays it out again, to my delight. The CNO is heading east. And at this point, I don't think there's really a way for the B&O to develop track for itself. I'm close enough to Lancaster that even if the B&O were to float in the next stock round, I don't think that they would beat me there. So I withhold again. At this point, Arison's probably really regretting his decision to invest in this company. And I'll just point out the treasury, right? So I started with 670, bought a two train for 80 bucks, and now I'm already up to 800. So in terms of withholding, yes, it's costing me a lot of personal money, but this money is all going to get spent later in the game on trains and tokens. So I don't really regret it, and it's benefiting me because I get 100% of the revenue and Arison gets none of it. So I stand by this decision. PRR lays Pittsburgh, and this is what I'm talking about at this point. Even if the B&O floats, the CNO is already linked up with Lancaster. There's basically no way that the B&O is going to get a token there. PRR is going to run for 40 and pays it out, which I believe will leave the CNO last in operating order. Not quite. So if it floats up, it will operate second again. But I finally, after 4 withholds, achieved my goal of operating later in operating order. I have 67 bucks. Those PRR shares are available, and I believe I just pick one up. Again, my goal here is just to accumulate a share lead and take this game late. I already have a company in yellow. Feeling pretty happy with how things are developing here. Reveler buys a PRR. Arison going to buy a PRR. Not a tree actually can't buy one. So we'll pass. I'm out of cash. Reveler will sell a CNO, which I'm happy to see. It puts me further in yellow, further behind in operating order, and he's going to start pressuring the B&O. So I think Reveler was the first one to blink on this NYNH. He started paying while I was still withholding, and now he's very uncomfortable with the idea of this game stalling, probably worried about the private revenue for Arison, $30 each operating round. But, I don't know that that's a real concern that he needs to have. I think he would be fine to just sit on the NYNH shares, pick up a PRR share, and let his company pay out. And I don't see that he needs to force this float. If Arison wants to be inactive and passive throughout this game, I think you just let him do that. I don't know, but regardless, going to buy a share there. Arison will respond by buying the CNO share, so he's ride or die on the CNO. Hasn't paid him a single penny yet, but he's doubling down. And then that will leave everybody else to pass, and we're into operating round 5, still on 2 trains. So this is a pretty remarkable stall at this point. NYNH paying out, PRR, no track to lay, and is actually going to withhold. So I believe paid out last time, but now is regretting that and is going to start paying withholding again to try and move to the left on the stock market. CNO, my company. At this point, there's no track for me to lay either, so I've accomplished my goal of getting where I needed to go. I will token in Pittsburgh because there's a small risk that the PRR could token in Pittsburgh, force me to upgrade Pittsburgh before I can get to Lancaster, which would, in theory, give the B&O an option to get into Lancaster. So I'll drop a token in Pittsburgh just to prevent that eventuality. And, at this point in the game, I've achieved what I wanted from this stall. So I'm happy to start paying out now. It benefits Arison as much as it does me, but he's already paid a huge cost, in my opinion, from letting this develop the way it has. So if he wants to just be a leech on the CNO and let the game progress without participating, at this point I'm fine with that. I don't need to change the status quo. I'll just run my runs, and I'll eventually have better runs and win in the late game. So I do decide to start paying out here. And the other thing that motivates this decision is that I realize that with a payout, I'll have just enough money if I sell some shares to par the NYC. And my goal here is always to run 2 companies. The NYC, I think, is a great kind of second stage company. It already has track laid for it. I don't intend to fully float the NYC here, but I've done the math and I realize that with a payout, I can par it and defend that par if someone wants to contest it. So that's the reason. That's the other reason I'm paying out here, is that I need a little extra liquidity into the stock round. Stock round 6 rolls around. Not a tree is just going to pass. Doesn't want to secure this NYC presidency. Probably doesn't have really the liquidity to maintain control of the NYNH and the NYC if he were to sell out to try and par this. So probably the right decision. That said, it benefits me, and I will go ahead and sell out of these paying shares just to get a float of the NYC. I've done the math here, and I feel pretty comfortable in that I could defend this float if somebody wanted to pressure me. But I'm actually hoping that nobody does, and I'll just sit on the paying shares of the PRR and the NYNH until I can comfortably float the NYC without any more stock sales. So far this game is going swimmingly for me. Reveler's up. He's going to buy another B&O. Potentially could take that presidency, which would not be the end of the world. I mean, a $400 investment for a $1,000 treasury is the best deal you're going to get in this game. So I think if I'm Arison, I probably would defend this. But Arison is without a care in the world. He says that I dare you to take it. I'll steal your NYNH if you do. And he ends up being right. Reveler doesn't push it, and they just both have $200 tied up in that dead company at this point. Because I paid out and because I keep floating up, I am somehow now, despite withholding like 4 times in a row, first in operating order. There's no valid track for me to lay, but I don't really care because, again, my revenue is the highest in the game, and I'm just waiting to build up the cash to float this NYC. So I will pay it out, and we'll go to the NYNH. Pays it out. PRR is paying it out. And now that I've started paying out, I think these other players are happy to follow my lead and start paying out. Again, they just want to operate behind me. So if I'm going to pay out, they feel liberated to do so as well. So this is a little bit more of a standard game now, and we're just waiting for a fourth company to float. Whether or not that will be the NYC or if that will be the B&O remains to be seen. Stock round 7 now, and we're still in 2 trains, an incredibly slow game. Arison at 200 is going to sell out of the C&O and now is going to start floating the B&O. So that answers everybody's question. The B&O is going to float. They're going to break the 3 trains, and then we'll be off to an actual game of 1830. Why he just picks this moment to float the B&O is not entirely clear to me. Could have done this much earlier. Maybe Reveler sitting at 2 shares along with him. He feels uncomfortable. Well, now Reveler could probably take that presidency more safely, so he decides to defend now. That may be the thinking there. But the benefit from my perspective is that he's just dropped the C&O 5 slots. So my master plan of operating last in the stock round where the 3 trains come out is going to come to fruition. This B&O is going to float. It's going to be obligated to buy 1 train, and then either these players buy the rest of the 2s and their 3, or I do it and they miss out on their privates. So all my withholding on the C&O is going to end up paying off for me, even though Arison was very stubborn about this B&O float. Okay. Not a tree buying the cheap C&O. Fair enough. Why not? I will join his lead. I'm up to 60% of this. And now that I have 60% and I've kind of scared off my parasite investor, it's much more likely that this company will be paying out in the future than it historically has been. Reveler has exactly $1 over what he needs to buy C&O, but will sell out and is going to pressure the B&O float. I guess he realizes that there's not really much chance that the C&O sells out, so he can come back after trashing the B&O. Trashing the B&O is not a huge priority. It's probably actually helping Arison to buy these shares, so I don't know that I agree with this move, but it is what it is. Arison now has a floated B&O and has a ton of liquidity, so he's going to just secure the presidency of the B&O and maybe look towards a second presidency, which, if there's a train rush here, is a little bit dangerous. Nobody has really had the opportunity to develop a big net worth to withstand a train rush if there's emergency purchases. So if we see like 3-4 companies float here, we may be looking at a bankruptcy, but we'll have to monitor that situation as it evolves. Not a tree buys the C&O. I am passing. There are shares that I could buy, but again, we're facing probably the operating round where the 3s come out. So I'm anticipating all these companies to be sold down in the next stock round for new floats. I don't know that I necessarily want to put my cash into a company that's going to be dropping in stock value potentially dramatically. The NYNH would potentially be safe to invest in because it's a ledged company, but I decide not to risk it. What if he withholds and I just end up losing value or something? Reveler sells out of the B&O and is going to buy my NYC, so he's going to force that float as well. And this is kind of what I was talking about. If there's a storm of companies floating here, we might be into a bankruptcy type situation. I have enough cash to defend this presidency. I'm not overly concerned about it, and I assume Reveler knows that. He's just going to try and force it, the float. Arrison's going to sell out further and actually does go back for that second company par. And I think this is mostly made possible, or at least made possible at a high par, because Reveler helped him out with the float of this company. Not a tree buying the CNO, so up to 3 shares there. And I will go back and buy my NYC. I'm going to have to buy 2 more shares there, but I've been very cautious in this game, and behind the scenes, I've been doing the math to make sure I have the liquidity to do that. Reveler going to continue pressuring. I'm fine with that. Arison working on his float. Not a tree's passing. I have to sell, and I will float the NYC. Reveler pushes it one more time, and then I have to sell again and get up to a secure presidency in both of my companies. Looking at the game state here, I'm pretty happy with the way things look. Arison's going to have to buy a bunch of 2 trains, a bunch of 3 trains before these 4 trains even become available. So he's going to deplete most of these shiny new treasuries on, very tenuous trains. That doesn't seem like a real winning position. And then I have a pretty healthy treasury on the CNO. I don't have a huge private to buy in. I have a well-capitalized NYC, which is going to have good runs guaranteed. Both my companies have good runs. So I figure if this game goes late, I'm going to be fine. I just need to make sure that nobody bankrupts, including myself, and I lose this game, on a random bankruptcy situation. Reveler is going to trash the NYC, putting both my companies pretty far into yellow, and he has to now redeploy his capital, and he elects to take the Erie. Doesn't have the cash to really get anywhere near floating it. So just reserving that presidency for himself for after the M&H gets bought in, which is, I think, fine to do, but it does really kind of hamper his growth in this game. Locking up $160 at a key moment in the game is not ideal. I can't criticize it too much. Of course, I did the same thing on the NYC not too long ago, but I will say that the NYC is just a better company than the Erie. So. There's definitely pluses and minuses to it. If Reveler did not do this, he would probably run in the CPR in the next stock round. So I understand the logic there. It's just it's a painful decision, but probably the right one. Arison continues to float the B&M. Reveler is going to buy another share in the Erie, and Arison will float his company. I think everybody else is just passing at this point. Great. So we are into stock round 7, and we should expect a pretty explosive train rush here with 3 new companies floating after 7 rounds of inactivity. B&M lays Providence and is going to buy 3 2 trains and 3 train. I think while Arison doesn't have exciting privates to buy in, you do need to make sure that you secure yourself a 3 train, because if you just buy a 2 train on your 2 companies, these other players are going to rush through the 2s and the 3s, and you're going to fall back on both of your companies in the next operating round. So as painful as it is to buy all these 2 trains, I think it's what you have to do. He, of course, is hoping for a sharp upgrade on this track here to get into New York. And me on the NYC, I'm going to do everything I can to prevent that. Bison is private, B&O's up, doesn't bother heading towards Lancaster. That would have been a kind of dead track lay anyways, so just giving himself the opportunity to lay the Philadelphia track, assuming that not a tree is going to buy in the CNA and the B&O will operate before the PRR or the CNO. So we'll see if that works out for him. I think that's probably the right move. Buys a 3 and buys 2 3s even, probably assuming he'll get the Philadelphia run and then a run through Washington into the offboard. He'll have pretty good revenue on the B&O. He is very heavily invested in the 3 trains, or the rank of 3 trains. So these 2 trains are not going to survive, and now he's got 3 trains, which may come back to bite him later. Also note that he started this operating round with $1,800 of company treasury to play with, but he's now down to 800 something, and he has no permanent trains. So he spent more than half of his capital that the companies had available on trains that may not last very long. And I think this just comes back to my criticism from earlier that he was very passive throughout the early game, and now is in a pretty hard position to come back from, where he has to push trains, but then hope for a stall after the trains have been pushed, which just seems very unlikely. All right. Shuffling cash around, making the B&O a little bit less attractive for other players to take over, leaving himself money for a token and this $80 track lay, and just consolidating his assets in the B&M. NYNH has access to green track, lays the Albany track, and this is great because it allows me to lay this track rather than upgrade Albany. Of course, it benefits the NYNH as well. He's going to be running this track. He probably is hoping for double runs out of New York. Whether or not he can actually get double runs is a open question. He would, of course, need 2 trains to do that. So maybe this upgrade is not as high yield as it would otherwise be for him, but he also doesn't want to pay the $80 to upgrade his home tile, I'm sure. Runs for 50 and pays it out, buys the 3, buys his private, and leaves the NYC to operate. I think it would be very tempting to lay the gentle curve into New York here, and delude yourself that you're going to get 2 runs into New York on the NYC company. But the problem with that is that it's very easy for the B&M to lay a gentle upgrade. Basically, it would be this track right here in the next operating round, and then the NYC has kind of put himself in a position to compete for the New York token in the future, which is not a position you want to be in. So from my perspective, the odds of me getting 2 trains to run into New York is very low. I'm going to prioritize denying the B&M runs into New York above getting myself 2 runs into New York, which I probably would never actually materialize. So I lay a gentle curve here. There's no valid upgrade that the B&M can lay in green to get into New York now. They can upgrade and get into Scranton and potentially head west from there, but that's a very expensive track and much further down the road. I will have time to counterplay against that if that's what he wants to do. And if the B&M is negligent and upgrades Providence instead of this track, the NYNH or the NYC could still upgrade this as a gentle to get that double run if they wanted. So this is, I think, a pretty nice move to hurt the B&M and leave my options open. I buy a 3, I buy a 4. It does rust my train on the CNO, but it also rusts the train on the PRR. It was going to happen regardless, so I might as well be the one to do it and prevent Not a Tree from getting a run that I don't get. Also, I'm going to need 2 trains eventually. Might as well just buy them now, and then I can shuffle cash around when I buy one of the trains over into the CNO. That's in contrast to just buying the 3, letting the PRR buy the first 4, and then buying a second 4 on the CNO. It ends up in the same state, but it has some nice benefits. PRR, trainless, is going to upgrade Lancaster. In theory, could have bought in the CNA and then upgraded that instead, but it likes to do it this way, which is perfectly acceptable. I now have the option of laying the Camden and Amboy Philadelphia track or the double dit, and I end up going for the double dit just because I don't care all that much about how Philadelphia upgrades. I already have guaranteed access to New York, and I'm going to have a 4 train in the CNO, so I'm going to be able to run Philadelphia regardless of its connection at Lancaster or if it's connected at New York. And by not laying Philadelphia, I force the B&O to lay Philadelphia in the next operating round, so they cannot lay Washington and get double runs. So this plan from Arison to run both of his 3 trains is going to be delayed by an operating round as a result of my decision to lay Reading and Allentown instead of Philadelphia and Trenton. I buy in my private and the 4 from the NYC. I leave myself enough cash to lay my track if I need to in the future. And I give permanent train to the NYC, permanent train money to the NYC. We are into stock round 8. Not a tree is up. There's really not too many attractive companies to float. So he has a ton of cash, but may want to just look at these cheap brown shares and just build a stock lead that way rather than parring the CPR. That said, apparently he disagrees. He sells out of the PRR and the CNO quite heavily to par the CPR. And I think this is probably the worst decision that's made in the game. And I don't say that to be, nasty to not a tree, but I think it's important to recognize just how consequential this decision is. He's put 5 shares of the PRR into Brown. And so that's a guaranteed steal for basically any of the players at the table. I could steal it myself. I have over $100. Granted, it has $0, but it does have a 4 train, right? So if you can get 5 shares with a single stock action, and then you think you're going to be able to withhold like twice on this 4 train, the 4 run is going to be over $100 easily. You're going to be sitting pretty close to, a very affordable permanent train, even with just 2 withholds. So that is a no-brainer to steal that company, I think. And then the CNO looks great. It also has a 4 train. Now it has $200 on top of the PRR, and it has the same runs. It maybe even has better runs because it has access into Chicago. So giving me, 100% of the CNO in exchange for floating a terrible CPR is inexcusable. And then giving away the PRR is just the icing on top of that. So really, really questionable decision. I don't think that they had to do this at all, and I think it's just really distorts how this game ends up. I will also note that he did not even have to sell a share in the PRR to float the CPR at like 90. So for an extra $100 on this company, he's lost control of the PRR potentially. Could have done exactly what he's done and sold the CNO down, but then just parred the CPR a little bit lower and maintain control of the PRR. He is the player with the Champlain and St. Lawrence. So if his goal is to suitcase the CPR and rehabilitate the PRR, he should absolutely have stayed at 50% invested in that company. So a lot of problems with this. I won't harp on it anymore, but just important to recognize this type of play. My decision from this seat is a no-brainer. I'm going to go up to 100% of the CNO. I don't think there's any question that that's strictly the right decision. So now you look at this game and you say, oh boy, I've got, basically double everybody else's shares with reasonable train liability. NYC has permanent train money. CNO is not far off, and I have 10 shares in Brown. This can be a pretty strong position. The other players are really going to have to try and push trains before this game goes late to prevent me from winning. Reveler, he's going to work on floating his Erie. Again, with 2 new trains, 2 new companies floating, it's conceivable that we could see a train rush and a bankruptcy. So I'm definitely not out of the woods, but anytime you can pick up 5 shares in a company in a single action, you should probably strongly consider it. Harrison, he's going to buy a NYNH, so not interested in this PRR. And I don't know. I think that if I was in his shoes, I probably would pick that up. He's got $700 for a permanent train in the B&M. His B&O is going to operate at least once with those 3 trains. Should have decent revenue there. And then, like I said, can withhold on the PRR once or twice and probably would be in a pretty good position. But can decide to play it differently, goes for the NYNH. Not a Tree has committed to the CPR. I am going to buy probably 1 more share here, and I will buy the B&O. Again, the only company in the game with 2 trains is going to have decent revenue. I'm not at risk of a dump here, so might as well just continue to build my share lead and buy paying shares. Reveler floating the Erie here. Harrison just sitting pretty. Not a Tree, floating the CPR. I buy a PRR. I don't have the cash to take the company over, and I don't want to put myself in a position where nobody takes it over. Not a Tree withholds a couple times and then dumps it on me with a no train or something like that. So I'll play it conservatively. I think it would be reasonable to buy a second share here. I just don't want to press it too much. So I buy 1 share, and I'll just maintain that for the rest of the game, basically. Reveler now floated on the Erie, and not a tree close to floating the CPR. Reveler is going to basically buy up all those brown shares that I was talking about. And because I bought one of them, is unable to steal the presidency in one fell swoop. But not a tree is unable to defend, of course. So unless Arison or myself take mercy on not a tree and buy this $67 share, Reveler can buy that out. And I think he really needs to buy that out. You definitely don't want to sit in a split presidency like this in a vulnerable company, because if Reveler doesn't take control of the presidency now, not a tree is just going to withhold twice and dump it on him in the next operating round, next stock round. Not a tree's now floated. I'm passing. Reveler has to sell one of these Erie shares, which is not the end of the world, and he does steal that presidency. So this is basically the nightmare scenario for Not a Tree. I think that was a big misplay, and he's being punished appropriately for it. Everybody's passing, and we're into the operating round. So we saw two new companies float here. There are, I believe, two Fortrains left. And we will have to see if players want to push trains or if we're going to see a little bit of a stall here. Both the CPR and the Erie are viable suitcases. That said, because Not a Tree lost control of his second company, now he's really in a position where he needs to actually run the CPR. Whether or not Reveler wants to run the Erie is something we'll have to determine. When you look at net worth here, Reveler is narrowly in the lead, but really not far enough in the lead that he should feel confident in pushing trains and hoping for a bankruptcy. One, he could find himself on the wrong end of that and just bankrupt himself. And two, his Erie is going to fall back, whereas Arison, in theory, can pay out on both of his companies. So if someone bankrupts, it's very conceivable that Arison will be the one to win. All right, so let's see how these players decide to do it. CPR laying himself track. Doesn't technically need to buy a train here, but if he doesn't buy a train, won't have runs in the next operating round, so probably wants to. It does. Buys in his private, lays the track. Erie, laying his track towards the Hamilton and Toronto, suggesting that he may be setting up for a suitcase, but it's not entirely clear. I think traditionally, if you're trying to run the Erie, you want to head over to Rochester and secure that token, and you might want to orient Dunkirk and Buffalo to facilitate that. But it's also not unreasonable to say, I'm going to run into Hamilton and Toronto earlier and just try and set up a run into four $50 cities. So it's suspicious, but not guaranteed that he wants to suitcase this at this point. Buys a 3. The fact that he's doing this now is much more suggestive that this will, in fact, be a suitcase attempt. So shuffling a ton of money into the NYNH, and the NYNH now has enough cash that it can buy the final 4 and then the first 5. If he does that, he'll be giving probably double 5s away to Arison if he isn't careful. So we'll have to see how this actually comes out. Arison has $700. Upgrades into Scranton, like we suggested. There is no valid upgrade for him to get into New York in green. So my strategy has worked here and has a pretty poor run with his 3 train. Oftentimes B&M with 3 trains runs pretty well, but just running for 16 pays it out. He buys the 4, and he's going to buy the first 5, it looks like. Actually, he doesn't have the cash to quite do it. Is this where he undoes? No, he's just going to shuffle cash. So now he's got cash in the B&O for a 5 train. He's going to have to discard one of the trains in the B&M. And, this is going to give double 5 trains to Reveler, so who's probably very happy to see this. So we were worried that maybe Arison was going to end up with double 5 trains, but it looks like it's going to be Reveler. And this is pretty dangerous for the table, right? His liability here is that he just took over the PRR with basically no cash in it. But if he's able to get 2 cheap 5 trains, well, then affording 1 other permanent train is very feasible. So that is dangerous for the rest of the table. I'm not sure why Arison felt the need to push for trains here. He could have just sat on the 3 trains that he had and let other people push into the permanent trains for him. If the game stalls and he's sitting on 3 trains to everybody else's 2 trains, that's going to benefit him. But I guess he felt differently. Maybe I'm partly to blame for it because I denied him the ability to run both of those 3 trains by not upgrading Philadelphia. So that's possible. Regardless, B&O lays Washington. and actually doesn't lay Philadelphia. So neither one of us is interested in that track. And is going to buy a 5 train here. So we are into brown. Discards a 3. NY and H is up. Probably happy as a clam. Actually does the B&M's dirty work for it and lays the upgrade that will get the B&M into New York. I guess this is a move to get me to upgrade New York for him. I'm not sure. But regardless, he's probably not too worried about anything now that he's picked up both 5 trains. It's bad news for me. I have something like $800 total between my two companies, and all the 5 trains are gone. So I'm looking at a 6 and a D train likely. My best case scenario would be 2 6s. At this point, I'm kind of scared. I'm saying, am I going to bankrupt? My goal here was to take the game late, but with a 3 and a 4 and no 5s, that may not come to fruition. This 4 train is a big deal, though. If you're sitting on 2 3 trains facing 6s, you're very, very likely to bankrupt. If you are sitting on a 4 train, however, you've got just that little extra breathing room, and that will come into play, as we'll see. So I upgrade, head over to Rochester. I am recognizing that this Erie is looking like a suitcase, and although I would get a few extra bucks by upgrading New York, I really can't afford to upgrade it, and I don't want this suitcase to be allowed to continue any longer than absolutely necessary. Run my train, and I pay it out. With 80% of the revenue and no co-investors, I think there's a real strong argument for paying over withholding there. Reveler finally upgrades Philadelphia. He's going to run his 4 train for $100, and that run is going to get a lot better as soon as he's able to establish a run into New York with an upgrade on Philadelphia. Probably should withhold here, and does. And this is what I'm talking about. He's going to be able to withhold at least twice and should be sitting pretty for a permanent train, his 3rd permanent train. C&O should probably upgrade Philadelphia here, and does. I killed the B&O, so again, not to harp on this too much, but the B&O sat idle for 5+ operating rounds, and now its runs are looking very poor. Has lost access to New York for the rest of the game. Is going to be dependent on getting access to the West and potentially into Chicago long term, but whether or not that actually happens is very unlikely. He needs to upgrade Baltimore and then this track before he even has the opportunity of getting access to Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, the PRR now has token money and can token in Pittsburgh whenever he chooses. All right, C&O running for 140 and going to withhold it. Oh, actually paying it out. I had misremembered that. I think that my thinking here is that I have 100% of the revenue, so withhold or pay is kind of meaningless. If the money goes to the company and I have to emergency buy a train, or if it comes to myself and I have to emergency buy a train that way, it kind of doesn't matter. By paying it out, I have the option of paying shares if I'm given that opportunity in the next stock round. So maybe that's my rationale here. I could have withheld with the thinking that I would just put myself further into brown and I could pay out later in the game. And just maintain my brown status for longer. But I think I wanted the cash into the next stock round and just really to hoover up as many shares as I can. So I think that's my thinking here. CPR gives itself a run, is running for 70. I'll note that the PRR, the company he lost to do the shenanigans, is running for 100. So strictly worst company at this stage in the game. He's going to withhold, and that gives him exactly enough money for a 6. So he should snag that, and does. B&M 4 train doesn't have money to upgrade New York, doesn't have money for tokens, so probably is going to upgrade his home in Boston. Does, and is going to run for 90 and pays it. B&O upgrades his home, does have a decent run on his 5 train, but is going to need a permanent train on that B&M somehow, so needs to decide if he wants to pay out and only get 40 to 60% of the revenue, or if he's going to withhold for 100. He pays it. Probably a similar calculation that I was making, just wants cash into the next stock round. It's tempting to play it safe and withhold, but I think the way that ends up working out is you just can't afford enough shares and you lose late. So I understand the decision to pay there. Erie, doing nothing, just hoping a suitcase. NYNH is going to actually pay the money to upgrade his home for the extra $20, which I think is probably the mistake, right? Like if you're trying to suitcase the Erie, I think you want to start laying track and trying to prevent the NYC from getting over to your other company, I don't know that this is a massive priority. Also, by upgrading this track, you give me the opportunity to token there and reduce the tension between the B&M and the NYC. There's a little bit of a game of chicken between the B&M and the NYC and who upgrades for green, because that means the other player is going to get that brown upgrade. But now the NYC has kind of fallen on that opportunity and taken that decision away from us. So it's going to run for 150, pays it out. NYC trainless, but I have managed to give it enough money for the 6 train. So I'm going to head over to Rochester and buy that train. So my position is tenuous, but not guaranteed loss. I've secured one of my permanent trains. I do guaranteed need $1,100 for my next train, but who's in a position to push for this train right now? The other players don't have that much cash either. The PRR has a ton of cash and it's going to have monstrous runs. But my thinking at this stage in the game is if I can get 2 withholds on the CNO for another $300, then I can emergency buy this D train and still probably win this late. So I'm just hoping that I get a little bit of time to consolidate my position, and hopefully things won't be too bad when that 4 train rusts. CNO linking up to Baltimore, and I'm doing this just because it increases my revenue a little bit, and I'm going to need every dollar I can spare here. So I pay it out, and again, although I've said that I want to withhold, for me, withholding and paying are basically the same thing in this situation, just because I have 100% of the company. So by paying, I can put that money towards other stocks in the stock round and hopefully have other people finance my D-Train purchase. PRR is going to upgrade New York, and it's going to run for a monstrous 330 and withholds it again. So now is very close to bringing out that D-Train upgrade. And I was a little bit nervous about here because my mental math was that I needed 2 runs on this 4 train to avoid a bankruptcy. And it's looking like it's going to be razor thin whether or not he's able to get this upgrade with a single hold or if he's going to require 2 holds. So if you look at the math here, he'll be at 784 with another withhold, and he needs 800. So if someone gives him $20 more on his run, he can do it in a single hold. And I've done the math, and I discovered for myself that if both Lancaster, or actually, if either Lancaster or Baltimore is upgraded in the next operating round before the PRR runs, then the PRR will be able to upgrade the other one, and he'll have that run that I was worried about. So my fear here is that someone that's operating before the PRR is going to upgrade one of these tracks and potentially open up a bankruptcy situation by doing that. I'm certainly not going to upgrade either of these tracks on my companies, but the B&O is a wild card for me. So that's the liability that I see here. Looking at the game state, I am ahead in net worth. So if someone other than myself bankrupts, specifically Arison, I may win in a bankrupt scenario, but it is very conceivable that I would be the one to bankrupt, in which case I obviously would not. Arison's going to buy an NYC. It's a cheap share. It has permanent train. Seems reasonable. Not a Tree buys the NYC as well. And that leaves me the last one. Things are working out pretty nicely for me in these stock rounds where I'm able to snag these cheap shares at the last moment. Reveler doesn't have a lot of cash. He made the decision to push for trains rather than just pay out on the PRR. And as a result, is only going to be picking up 1 share in this stock round. I think that's something that you could question, right? Whether or not Reveler's really in a position to be pushing for a D-Train upgrade here. Sure, he has 3 companies, but one of them suitcased, and he's trailing in net worth. So if there's a bankruptcy, there's no guarantee that he's the one to win. I don't think that he necessarily needed to withhold to push trains here. He could have just sat on 50% of this massive revenue and taken this game late, like I'm trying to. Buys the NYNH, and Arison's up. He buys a CPR. CPR is not that attractive. It does have two trains, but its runs are not going to be that good, and he's paying a $18 premium right now for the privilege of those shares. That said, when you're looking at this game, there's not a lot of safe places to put your money because both Arison and myself are in the hunt for a second permanent train. So by investing in either of our companies, you may be opening yourself up to a dump. So maybe that's why he's looking for just a safe place to put cash. Not a tree, going to buy the NYC, so not too worried about getting dumped on. I am going to buy an NYNH, and I'm happy to open myself up to risk. Again, my whole strategy here is to allow other people to buy my D train for me. I'm just trying to buy as many shares as I can. If somebody wants to dump on me, I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Reveler sells out of the Erie, committing to this suitcase, and he's going to buy some paying shares. Arison buys his B&O. Not a tree's out of cash. I will go back and buy that last B&O. Again, this is a little bit risky, right? The B&O is very much possible to be dumped. It is technically running behind the B&M, but the two companies are close in the stock position, so that order can be changed easily. So that's something I'll have to be aware of. Reveler is going to buy a CPR. And I will buy, actually, I'm just passing here. I had forgotten that. So I think I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable with, giving Reveler priority here and opening up an easy dump for him on this NYNH. So operating around 9, and we will see how exactly this D train comes about. B&M upgrading Providence, runs it and withholds. So he's just changed the operating order of the B&O and the B&M and is telegraphing that he may want to dump this B&O on me. I think Arison at this stage in the game is feeling very confident that he's going to be able to dump the B&O, bankrupt me, and win on that bankruptcy. So he's going to pay and not prepare himself for a D-train purchase at all, realizing that if I bankrupt, he's the one with the second highest net worth, so he'll win the game. And we'll monitor that situation. So he's going to upgrade Baltimore, which is the danger scenario that I was talking about, right? So by upgrading Baltimore, now the PRR is guaranteed to be able to upgrade Lancaster and get the D upgrade on a single withhold rather than the two withholds that I was planning on. And I think that at the time I was frustrated by this because I thought this was a mistake. But from Arison's perspective, he's planning on dumping the B&O and winning in bankruptcy. So he wants this D train to come out, and this facilitates that. So fair enough. Runs for 180, pays it. CPR, pretty poor revenue, 140, and pays it. NYNH, upgrading Boston for a little extra money and pays it for 190. NYC. So this is where I need to start being careful. I need to figure out where my permanent train money is coming from. Not the most painful thing in the world to keep companies in yellow, so I may end up withholding this. Let's see. And I do. I do need to be a little bit careful of where my D train ends up. So if I withhold in the NYC and then shuffle this 6 train to get all the money in one company, I may end up running the 6 train in the NYC. And I've done the math here, and the NYC's D run's a little worse than the C&O's D run. So I need to make sure I get the D train in the right company. Erie is still suitcased. On the NYC, I'm just basically giving myself options here. No matter what ends up happening here, I want the control of determining when this Erie suitcase breaks. And I also want to break that suitcase in a way that does not result in giving it good runs. So I'm going to eventually break this suitcase, but I'm not in a rush to do so before I've established control of the 00 tiles. C&O's up, I upgrade Lancaster for a few extra bucks, and I'm going to start withholding here. Again, this is to keep myself yellow or brown, but also so that I can afford my D-train purchase. The PRR is happy as a clam, is going to run and have enough revenue to actually buy the D with a single withhold, which is not good for me. D-train comes out, and now if we look at the game state, I've got about $500 between my two companies. Fortunately, my permanent train is in my lead company, so I will get one more withhold, and that will bring myself up to about $700. So I won't have to bankrupt, but I will bankrupt if I get a third company that needs a D train. So what I arrive at as a way of saving myself is something that I did in the last game. If you watched the last tournament game, is that I'm going to withhold on the NYC, but then I will be able to shuffle trains in an emergency buy the D train into the C&O by selling these B&O shares. And that has the benefit of saving myself from the dump of the B&O, but also having already gotten the revenue from the B&O when it operated. So it's kind of a slick play, but we'll see how that develops, and I'll show you. B&O upgrades. Again, he's anticipating dumping this company on me, so he's got no incentive to withhold. He's just going to shuffle trains and try and buy his, or avoid buying a D train at all. He pays out CPR, just developing his runs. B&M, now trainless, but again, he doesn't need to buy a train because he thinks he's going to dump the B&O on me, so he's just going to shuffle the train over. Interesting that he shuffles cash into the B&O. Especially because he's probably going to dump this company on me, or at least he thinks he is. So you would think that he would want to just maintain the cash where it is. Maybe he's hoping to just throw away cash and tokens, so it's a less attractive company for me. NYNH upgrades Albany and is going to pay it. Shuffling trains in the PRR. He's got 3 permanent trains now, so he doesn't actually have to suitcase the Erie, but he probably knows that the runs in the PRR and the NYNH are going to be better than the Erie runs, so he'd prefer to maintain the suitcase if possible. NYC, again, just setting up to break this suitcase, and I token in Rochester. That eliminates any influence that the NYNH can have on the way these track tiles develop, and it also neuters the Erie's runs in the long term. Pretty bold, if I do say so myself, to be dropping $100 tokens when you're staring down the barrel of the D trains. But I've done the math far in advance of this, and I know exactly how I'm going to afford this train. And actually, it can be dangerous to my strategy to have too much money, just because I need to emergency sell those B&O shares. So this is all kind of planned in advance. Pay for 230, and the Erie is up. He's going to lay himself track. He's desperately trying to stop me from laying him track, but this is all just a delaying maneuver. There's no way he's going to be able to, prevent me from upgrading this track and then eventually getting into Dunkirk. So I think it's a noble effort, and I think it's the right move, but it's futile in the end run. Now, just because it's futile doesn't mean that it's not important to do, though. The timing of events is important to consider, too. If he can delay the breaking of the suitcase, that is a relevant factor. C&O is up and has the painful decision to sell shares to purchase this train. But again, this is all kind of saving myself from the future pain of a second D train. So I fund the D train. I obviously have to pay a lot. My net worth takes a huge hit, putting myself in last place. But I didn't have to sell that many shares. I'm still ahead in share count, and I'm only in operating round 0.2 here. So I'm going to have a whole nother stock round, or operating round, in this set before the stock round to build up cash to buy more shares. So it is dangerous to do this, but it's definitely the right move, and I stand by it. And I got a D train 100% investment, so that's going to pay for itself very, very quickly. PRR is up. He's upgrading Pittsburgh and tokens it, so the B&O is dead in the water, is going to have terrible runs for the rest of the game. PRR is running for 270, but the big difference here is that he's got a D train that's running for 270. He's only got 50% of that. I got a D train that's going to be running more than that, and I got 100% of it. So that's going to be a difference maker in the late game. CPR still just trundling along. NYNH has 2 5 trains. It's going to have really good revenue, but one of those 5 trains is going to be running in the Erie before long. So this is a very temporary situation. Runs for 340 and pays it out. B&O trainless, and I think Arison's now realizing the problem that I've created for him, because he can no longer shuffle trains. He can no longer dump the B&O, so he will be forced to emergency buy a B&O and he's in a very different situation than I was. He hasn't been withholding at all, and he has to sell basically his entire portfolio to afford this D train. So if we look at the game state now, my closest competitor, Arison, was basically eliminated with this event. He's down to 6 shares, 1/3 of my share count. He needs to be very careful that he doesn't just donate one of these trains to another player. He doesn't have the cash to defend both of these presidencies, so he's going to have to, shuffle these trains and just defend his presidency as best he can. His game is over. B&M pretty much forced to pay out here because he needs cash to buy shares. He's also going to shuffle the train out of the B&O because he correctly realizes he can't defend both of those presidencies. So now he just needs to buy up to 50% of the B&M, and he'll be able to maintain his companies. At this point in the game, I don't have to withhold anymore, and I am very much interested in building up cash for the next stock round. So I just upgrade here so I can, again, break the suitcase in the Erie as soon as possible. And then I'm going to pay out to buy shares in the stock round. Erie's up. He's going to try and again block me, but there's really no way that that's going to happen. This track will be upgraded eventually. And even if it wasn't upgraded, I still have access to this track through Erie to eventually get there. So there's no way he's not going to be running this company eventually. It's just a matter of time. C&O. This is a mistake that I make in this track lay. My goal here is to prevent the PRR from ever getting to the west and into these valuable offboards. But what I'm not realizing is that I have a D train, and I'm eventually going to want to run in this area. And this track is exactly what I need on this tile to get into Toledo efficiently. So it really comes back to bite me later in the game that I threw away this track here. But that said, I wasn't looking that far ahead, and it was just a little bit of a sloppy play. I run for 330. I pay it out. I will have to withhold on this company eventually to keep it in orange and brown, but I don't want to do it here because I need this cash to maintain my share advantage. So I think it is the right move to pay there, even though my revenue later in the game is going to be higher, and I'd rather pay later. But I just need the cash now so I don't lose the game in the stock round. PRR recognizes that he's been blocked here and is going to try and bypass it. We'll eventually make it to the west, but I'm just slowing things down. Much like he's just delaying the inevitable on the Erie, I'm just delaying the inevitable on the PRR. All right, so that brings us to stock round 10. It's been a slow game, but there's been some pretty big developments, and it ends up being a pretty darn close game. If you look at the net worths, I mean, Arison's dead, but Not a Tree, Track Talk, and Reveler are all within $300 of each other. Now the share lead is a different story. I'm way ahead of Not a Tree in shares, so Not a Tree is not going to win this game, particularly because a lot of his shares are tied up in the CPR, which has very poor revenue. But between me and Reveler, it's there's still a game here. I have a share lead, and my company's better. But he has the potential to run the Erie and snag up all these brown shares, and that could be a difference maker, because if he gets 4 more shares all of a sudden, now he's ahead of me in shares, and then it's just going to come down to whether or not his routes are good enough to compete with my routes. So definitely still some action here. Arison's going to have to buy a B&M to try and defend his presidency. He decides to sell to the NYC. He really didn't have any options there. That was the only move he could make. Not a Tree is going to buy the NYC that was just sold. Track Talk buying the B&M. B&M with 2 trains is attractive. Of course, it's not going to be running those 2 trains. But at this stage, I just got to avoid giving Reveler the opportunity to dump any companies on me. So I'm just going to put my cash where it's safe to invest. Reveler buying the B&M as well. Arison is going to buy my NY&H. Technically, he needs to buy a 5th share in the B&M to be secure, but he probably realizes this company is going to get cut up amongst multiple players, so nobody's going to be able to get 5 shares. He's feeling comfortable buying another player's shares. Not a Tree, NY&H, that gives me another. Actually, I don't buy the NY&H because I'm worried about, again, Reveler dumping on me. Not a Tree is safe to invest in because he only has 1 company, so I'm going to stock my cash there. It's not the most attractive company, but it's a safe store of value. Reveler sees the value in that and buys CPR as well. Harrison's out of cash. Not a Tree can't buy the CPR, so he will risk the NYH dump and invest there. Reasonable. I will snag that last CPR. Reveler buying the B&O. I will buy a B&O as well. Nobody wants to have this company dumped on them, of course, but they also want to get as many shares as they can because in the next stock round, it's going to have a train and everybody's going to buy those shares. So at this point, there's really not too many shares left to buy. I'm debating whether or not I want to buy one Erie share just to prevent Reveler from buying all 4 of these shares. But I end up buying the B&O because I think it's probably higher value to do that at this point. I'm really hoping that Reveler is a worse player than he ends up being and that he doesn't see that he's going to have to buy these Erie shares. But that is not going to happen, and he does see that eventually he's going to have to run those company, so he might as well buy the shares now. And so at that point, there's only really B&M shares left, and you have to pay a premium to own them, but there's not another place to put your money, so everybody goes back for those. And I will get a minority investor in there. This does leave me open to a dump, but if you look at the situation in the stock market, there's really nothing else to buy. So if Harrison were to dump the B&M on me, he'd be, cutting off his nose to spite his face. He's not going to be able to invest that cash anywhere else in the next stock round, so I feel safe doing it. It does have the downside of giving Reveler a priority deal, but at this stage, I think priority deal is becoming less important just because I'm not in dump risk for any of Reveler's companies or not a tree, and I don't think Harrison is incentivized to dump on me. All right, so that brings us to 10.1. We are making our way to the end of the game, I promise. Not a Tree is just working to improve his revenue up north. NYH is taking advantage of his double 5 trains, but this is not going to last for much longer. Maybe the last time that occurs. B&M, as a result of floating up, is able to operate ahead of the B&O and is going to get one double run, but it's pretty poor because his track is undeveloped. B&O has to shuffle a train across. NYC, my company, I now have, guaranteed ability to lay track for the Erie, so this suitcase is definitely going to be broken in the next operating round, and that will put an end to those monster runs on the NYH. My goal now is to just really limit how much the revenue the Erie can run for. Again, I have a narrow share lead on Reveler, but if he's able to get good revenue on that Erie, he may be able to still win this game. So I need to make sure that I leave myself token money on this NYC. That way, if he ever upgrades this 00, I can immediately token it and limit him to a run of basically $110, the 2 00s here in the Erie. I guess it'd be 160 because he'd be able to run that 00 on Hamilton. Runs for 230, pays it out. C&O now has some decisions to make. I want to stay brown until the end of the game as much as possible, so I'm going to have to do some strategic withholding. And what I realize at this stage is that because I'm going to be forced to withhold to maintain these shares, I might as well start withholding for a second D train. I don't want 2 D trains in the C&O, of course, but I can shuffle the train out of the NYC and run a D train in the NYC and a 6 and a D in the C&O, and those runs are pretty good. So because I'm withholding anyways, I'm going to start working towards that. And then I also want to, of course, improve my revenue by getting into Toledo. And I think it's around this point in the game that I realize that I messed up with this track lay, because I really, at this point, want to have this upgraded. So I give myself the opportunity for an upgrade in the next operating round, and I'm going to start withholding on the C&O. PRR heading west, pays it. Erie decides to bite the bullet and lay himself the track that I was going to lay next operating round, and he's going to buy the NYH's train across so he can start making money on the Erie. Not a Tree gets into the offboards. That's going to increase his revenue. NYH running a single 5 train, pays it out. B&M's game is pretty much over. There's no track left for them to lay. It's just going to be paying out. B&O is making moves towards potentially breaking out of his box, but he's going to need $120, and with a single 5 train and 2 runs before these shares are bought off the market, it's going to take withholds. Probably not worth even discussing. NYC. I'm going to prevent the Erie player from making this loop into Rochester. As it stands, he can only run for 110. If I had not done that, he potentially could run for 130. And at this stage in the game, it's kind of unclear who's going to win. And the game is pretty tight. I'm trailing, but I'm ahead in shares. So I just really want to deny every last dollar I can to Reveler. PRR now going to be getting to this offboard soon. So his revenue is going to increase by like $20. Pays it out. CNO, I get that upgrade that I was talking about. And I think here that I decide to pay out, and I think this is a mistake. I should have withheld here. My goal is really to get this next D train as quickly as possible. So I pay this out, but I think this is a blunder on my part, and I can't justify this in retrospect. I absolutely should have withheld here for a couple of reasons. One, it brings the D train faster, and two, I'm going to have to withhold a certain number of times to maintain my status in orange. You'd much rather withhold early when your revenues are low than withhold late after all this track has been developed and my run is, $60 higher than it is now. Or even higher actually, because I'm going to be running 2 trains in the CNO. So this is a mistake. I should have withheld here. This is not the only mistake I make in this game, but it is a big one. Erie, given himself options here because of the way the token is arranged, doesn't actually improve his run at all. Runs for 110, and he's going to withhold. So I think Reveler's a very astute player for a couple of reasons. I mean, he recognized buying those brown shares earlier, and what he recognizes now is that he needs to have enough money to not just lay this tile, but he needs to have the money to lay and token it. If he just lays it, I'm going to immediately token it, and he's going to lose the ability to ever run through there. But if he withholds twice, he can lay and token it, and then he will have the opportunity for much higher revenue on the Erie. So he's definitely playing this right, and it's scaring me because I want to win. Last run in this operating set, he's just running for, increasing his revenue by minimal amounts. NYNH is laying track that kind of doesn't matter. Again, he can only run 1 train out of this Erie, so running into Dunkirk is much higher revenue than running into Albany. B&M, nothing doing. B&O, nothing going on there either. NYC, I'm playing a game of chicken. I'm, again, not willing to upgrade this track because the Erie will just take advantage of it, so I'm just biding my time, hoping that he messes up and I get to token it and cut his runs. PRR gets into the offboard and pays it out. This brings him out of yellow and also brings me out of yellow, but since I have 10 shares in brown, or at least in orange, I'm not overly concerned about it. B&O is going to lay Toledo, and I'm kicking myself now for not having withheld earlier, because if I had, I would have been able to shuffle money over and bought the D train in the next operating round, but as it stands, I have to do 1 more withhold. So Erie is going to withhold again and elects not to lay this 00 for the reasons we've discussed. That brings us to stock round 11. Nothing really happens here except all the paying shares are bought, so I'll just zip through that. One mistake that Reveler makes is he doesn't buy any of his Erie shares. These shares are going to start paying now, and he allows me to just hoover them all up. So I end up with 30% of the Erie, and that should never have happened. When it's a close game like this, I know it doesn't look close because I'm down by $500, but it's only because I'm withholding on the CNO. So it's a mistake to allow me to buy those shares. We are into operating round 11. We're going to move through this pretty quickly at this stage. The game is coming to an end, and there's not too many interesting track decisions left. There is 1 additional track decision that we will talk about, but we'll move through it quickly. B&O is doing nothing. PRR is going to start moving towards Chicago, trying to get into there. So now I need to decide whether or not it makes sense for me to deny that or to just focus on improving my CNO runs. And I decide that because I have 10% of the CNO and he only has net 40% of the PRR compared to me, it's much better for me to just focus on improving the CNO runs than it is to try and block him out of Columbus or that type of thing. CNO has to withhold here to stay orange, and again, this is what I'm talking about, right? If I had withheld it earlier, I could start paying now, and my revenue now is $30 higher than it was then. So this is the error in paying in the last operating round. Regardless, I withhold here. I have 940. I'm going to shuffle a train out of the NYC. By doing it this way, I actually don't lose a run on the 6 train. It has already run this operating round. So I will fall back on the NYC, but the train value is preserved. And now the Erie has enough money to upgrade in token. So that secures his runs, which is what I was worried about. CPR is still doing nothing. NYC, I upgrade this so that he's forced to run into Rochester rather than giving him the opportunity to run into Barrie in Canada West. That would be like an $80 increase in his revenue. And again, he's got a 3-share lead on me in that company. So because I'm worried about this game being close, I decide to just cut his runs or block him in for the rest of the game. He's got no valid track lays now. NYC contributes $40 for a D train. Now I have 2 D trains. Did have to fall back on the NYC to do that, but it's a small price to pay, as you'll see. PRR is making moves towards this track here, and I prioritized laying Toledo instead of blocking him. So now I need to decide if I want to prevent him from piggybacking off of this track that I'm planning to lay. And I decide to do it, but I do it in the incorrect fashion. So my goal here was to block him. And, this is potentially a tight game, so every track lay matters. By laying this, I'm not making progress towards Lansing, which is eventually going to increase my run. But my math at the time led me to believe that it was worth blocking him, but I actually laid a track that doesn't actually block him, so I just threw away a track tile that does not block him and delays my progress towards higher revenue. So this was a big error, and I'm very embarrassed to admit that I just totally did not recognize that he was still going to be able to get into Toledo with this track. Anyway, the CNO has a run of 540 now, which is monstrous considering I get 100% of it. So now I can start paying it out a little bit. Erie is done for the game and is going to be running for 180. This brings us to the last operating set in this last operating round in this set, and we're going to buzz through it since the track is pretty much defined. And you'll see here that the PRR does in fact get into my track, so this was a totally wasted track lay on my part. I'm going to continue to work towards increasing my runs, run for 540, and I pay it out. That brings us to the final stock round of the game. You'll notice that I am in yellow, not in orange, but I have done the math here and realized that instead of withholding and losing out $540, it's better just to drop 2 shares and drop down into the orange that way. It's much more money for me net to do it that way. It does give Reveler 1 share in my company, but it still gives me a 70% net of the revenue of the CNO. So I decided to do it that way rather than withhold. There's nothing other to talk about in this stock round. I'm forced to sell those shares and they buy them up, but then we're into the final operating round set. So this video has been long enough. Let's just look at the game state. I am at 27 shares, Reveler's at 24. I trail him by $200, but that's only because I've been withholding heavily on the CNO. So the other 2 players are not in contention. They trail too heavily in shares. Basically, now that I'm free to pay out on the CNO, I'm going to win this game by a comfortable margin. I don't think that we need to go through that in detail. I'll just point out to you that after the first operating round, I am in the lead by $200, and it's only going to get worse from there. So we'll skip to the end of the game, and you can see I take it by a margin of $1,700 or $700. So I win this one. I think that I played it okay. I had several blunders. This was a mistake here because I needed this track. This was a huge mistake here. And then we talked about the payout instead of withhold. But in the end, my blunders were, I guess, lesser blunders than the other players, so I was able to win it. Talking about the other players for a moment, we'll talk about Not a Tree. I think the, 800-pound gorilla in the room is his decision to par the CPR and sell out of the PRR and the CNO to do it. That was a game-losing decision and really warped the game state for the other players. And then Arison was relying on dumping the B&O on me to avoid running a D train, and as a result didn't do any preparation for the eventuality where I was able to dodge that dump, and then he had to blow up his own portfolio to afford the D train. So that was his downfall. And then Reveler, I think, played a very solid game. I think he very nearly won this game and did everything pretty much right. I do wonder, if this game would have been different if he had decided to just sit on the 4 and 5 in the PRR and pay out rather than withhold and press for the bankruptcy win, or the D train. It's hard to know. I think you'd have to play the game and see what happened. So I can't criticize him too much for that, but I do recognize that as a key decision on his part, that dictated the outcome of this game. So well played to all the players. This does mean that I'll be advancing to the final, which I am very excited about. I wasn't able to make it last year, but I will this year, and I'm excited to bring that game to you in the future once it's finally done. So wish me luck.